I'm reading Thou Shall Prosper, second edition, 10 Commandments for Making Money by Rabbi Daniel Lapin. Fifth Commandment is lead consistently and constantly. Learning to lead is important, but it may not be what you think it is. Leadership is not a noun, it is a verb. It is not an identity, it is an action. Don't try to become a leader, just do it. Just lead. Serving as a rabbi to my beachfront community in Los Angeles during the 1980s, I saw it as my duty to teach the Torah. Rabbi, of course, means teacher in Hebrew. Most of the members I served were accomplished professionals in fields as diverse as business, entertainment, and medicine. What possible relevance could a 3,000-year-old document have to their busy and productive lives? I had been taught that the information in this remarkable book was indispensable to happy and successful living. But how would I go about demonstrating that to this impressive group of most of whom were far more accomplished than I? My first step was to show that examining the Torah in its original Hebrew was an incomparably more profound experience than merely reading it in an English translation. My next step was to show how even those familiar with the language in which it was written would still require a guide to probe the really useful principles contained in the Torah. A useful model of this problem was provided by an original German version of the Treatise on Thermodynamics, written by the great scientist Max Planck in Berlin during 1897. One fine California evening, I held the weighty treatise aloft and explained to my audience it contained truly useful information on how the world worked and that I wanted to read several pages to them. I hadn't read more than a paragraph in its almost incomprehensible German when I pretended to notice the baffled looks on the faces of almost everyone present. "What is the problem?" I asked. In tones usually reserved for addressing mental idiots, someone carefully explained to me that I was reading in German, a language few understood. Apologizing profusely, I put away the intimidating book and replaced it with the English translation of the work done by Alexander Ogg in Cape Town in 1926. I began reading. The energy of any body or system of bodies in any given state is equal to the algebraic sum of the mechanical equivalences of all the effects produced outside the system when it passes in any way from the given normal state. Again, I questioned the looks of bewilderment that I pretended to have only just noticed. Just because you understand the language, which is highly technical material, just because you understand the language in which highly technical material is presented, doesn't mean that you will understand the material. In connection with thermodynamics, you would need a guide to walk you through the introductory studies of physics and mathematics on which thermodynamics depended. Similarly, a full understanding of the Torah has always required a guide. A person known as a rabbi who could explain the inner meaning as he was originally taught by someone who was his rabbi, and so on, until one establishes an unbroken line of verbal transmission back to Moses himself. I tell you all only of this to explain that much of the business wisdom that financially successful Jews have extracted from the Torah is not easily apparent in translation. Because the Torah is a comprehensive theory on the totality of all existence, its principles and guidance encompass many facets of life, not just business. The Torah is not laid out along the lines of a conventional business book. One cannot, for instance, look up the chapter that discusses leadership. Instead, as your guide, I have had to condense out the essence of leadership from the many places in which the principles are found. For this topic and others in the book, I have confined myself to the principles chiefly applicable to business interactions and to the admirable desire for money. What leadership training is not. You could easily find a teacher to instruct you in how to play tennis or chess, sail a boat, or operate a lathe. It would be far more difficult to learn how to be courageous, optimistic, and inspiring. Yet, these are only some of the qualities necessary for leaders to possess. Is it possible to train people to become leaders? The short, if paradoxical, answer is that one can learn to lead, but one cannot really learn to become a leader. Yet companies continue to try. For example, consider the following statistics. Of all U.S. companies with 100 or more employees, about 70% send managers to some form of leadership training. Penn State University estimated that about $15 billion is spent on executive training each year. Hundreds of organizations like the Center for Creative Leadership, CCL, in North Carolina attempt to turn managers into leaders by subjecting them to programs involving drinking green colored buttermilk, leaping off high platforms while suspended from lines anchored by their classmates, and engaging in paintball games. The American Management Association prefers classroom situations for its course, Developing Executive Leadership, and promises instruction in such areas as how to lead individuals, how to communicate under pressure, and how to handle difficult people. These are certainly useful skills, but do they lead to the corner office? I don't mean to belittle the programs or the organizations. CCO, for instance, brings in revenues of nearly 40 million, and it ranked eighth in the 2008 Financial Times survey of executive leadership education. The strikingly different approaches, however, do raise this question. Why does everyone agree on how to produce top-rate doctors, car mechanics, and physicians, but nobody seems to agree on how to produce top-rate leaders? Medical education in Bombay does not differ substantially from medical training in Boston, but every single leadership training program claims to have its own unique system. Part of the problem is that not everyone agrees on what leadership even means. Listen to two academics on the subject. Rosabeth Moss Cantor, a distinguished professor at Harvard Business School, said that leadership is the art of mastering change, whereas Thomas P. Gritty, the dean of the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, said that it was the ability to inspire and develop others. Here are the views on leadership of two chief CEOs of major companies. Michael Dell, chairman and CEO of Dell Computer, said that leadership is the ability to quickly understand dynamism in the market. George Fisher, CEO of Eastman Kodak, once said, "It is taking a group of people in a new direction or to a higher level of performance than they would have achieved without you." When asked to list what they considered the top ingredient for leadership, Moss Cantor responded, "Intelligence." Dell said, "Knowledge of industry." Gary and Fisher said, "Character and ability to inspire," respectively. Would Ernest Shackleton, who saved every last man on his ill-fated Arctic expedition early in the 20th century, have been considered a leader? I would say that he was a great leader, but only on his expedition. I doubt that he would have made it as a great leader had he subsequently embarked on a corporate career. Similarly, there's no reason to suppose that Michael Dell would necessarily emerge as a great leader of a mountain climbing expedition. Almost every about U.S. presidents shows that the presidents the public considers to have been great were those who served during wartime. Now, there are only two possible explanations for this anomaly. The first depends on an incredible coincidence. The United States has been remarkably fortunate to have had great men lead the country on each occasion when its need was greatest. The second, more plausible explanation is that the circumstances of wartime raised people to leadership and allowed them to exhibit capabilities that were possibly also possessed by other leaders less favored by history. Be ready to step into leadership. I am sure that stressful circumstances have created more leaders than have all the leadership training programs put together. Leadership is most needed precisely during moments of chaos, fear, and stress. When feeling fear and uncertainty, people turn gratefully to the man or woman who seems fearless and who seems to know what is going on and the direction in which people or events should be going. For example, in the first hours after the terrorist attack of September 11th, 2001, New York City's Mayor Rudolph W. Giuliani immediately demonstrated great leadership. Yet during the preceding couple of years, many people, including all those who discouraged him from seeking the U.S. Senate seat that Hillary Clinton later won, felt deep doubt about the mayor's leadership capacity. Professor Kenneth T. Jackson, a Columbia University historian, has ranked Mr. Giuliani behind Mayor Fiorello H. LaGuardia, mayor of New York from 1934 to 1945. But he has reserved himself If not for September 11th, he might have almost even been with a La Guerra, but since then he, Giuliani, showed his best side, leadership. For the weeks and months that followed, he was regarded as a great U.S. leader. Without the attack, he would have left office at the end of 2001, a well regarded New York mayor, but without ever having achieved greatness. On Mayor Giuliani's last day in office, the New York Times ran a front page story that claimed that there had been a whiff of irrelevance to the final years of the mayor's term. But due to his behavior on and after September 11th, the article dubbed him a man who became more than a mayor. One key to being a leader is to leap at the opportunity for leadership, but it does not usually transfer from one situation to another. In attempting to seek a Republican Party's nomination for the 2008 presidential election, Giuliani failed to persuade that he could lead the country as well as he had led the city of New York. Consider another example from history. Hampton Sides, a journalist and author, described a critical moment in World War II when emancipated and tortured survivors of the infamous Bataan Death March were about to be executed in a prisoner of war camp. During their captivity, some prisoners had removed from the camp and were thrown into the intolerably hot and crowded hold of a hell ship where they began panicking, screaming, and suffocating. They were only saved because one of their number took charge. From the din, a single voice emerged. A man named Frank Brigitte climbed high on the stairway and shouted down at the teeming masses in a clear, resolute voice. "Gentlemen," he said, "we're in this thing together, and if any of us want to live, we're going to have to work as one." Bridget struck just the right cool note at just the right time, and the hysteria abated. "Keep your wits about you," he urged. "If we panic, we're only going to use up more precious breaths of oxygen. Now listen, we're all going to calm down. Every one of us." Bridget was not a high ranking officer, nor was he especially well liked or admired. Prior to this day, he had been known as a nervous, intense, overeager guy who wore jolhapers and occasionally rubbed people the wrong way. But this day, he rose to the occasion in a remarkable act of poise and resolve. Manny Lawton, who had positively hated Bridget before, remembered his display of natural leadership with awesome gratitude. Sometimes people rise to greatness, Lawton told an oral historian, and you can never predict who will. Bridget was waiting in the wings and took responsibility. I don't know where he found the calmness. He saved us with his voice. Thus, you can see that leadership usually depends on circumstance. Consider Winston Churchill, who was a great wartime leader of the British people, but who lost his first post World War II election. One could diligently attend every single leadership training course offered in the United States without ever becoming a leader. I learned this from the Lord's language, Hebrew, which he doesn't even have a word for leader. The next section explains how Jews have viewed leadership. How Judaism defines leadership. Judaism has always been guided by the conviction that Hebrew is the Lord's language and that it possesses a word for every reality in the world. Conversely, when you encounter an idea for which no Hebrew word exists, you are led to question the reality of that idea. Obviously, this does not apply to the natural sciences. The fact that no Hebrew word exists in the Torah for nuclear reactor casts no aspersions on the existence of atomic power. But for the basic ideas of human life that have undergone little change through the eons of history, the absence of a word is grounds for suspicion. Take the word face, for which no Hebrew word exists in the singular. The language only offers a word for the plural, faces, or in Hebrew, panim. Ancient Jewish wisdom regards this as a warning never to assume that any person only has one face. This means that every person is not only two-faced, but even three-faced or four-faced. This is not a derogatory accusation, but a statement of fact. Your face changes as you age and mature, and it begins eventually to reflect aspects of your character. Relatives and friends who've known you for years have come to see those different faces. Furthermore, different people in your life see different faces that you wear. Around the dinner table at home, your family sees one face, whereas an adversarial business acquaintance might see quite a different face the next morning. It is in this spirit that one must question why Hebrew possesses no word for leadership. The language currently has words for king, for ruler, and even for director, but no word for leader. Even Moses, surely the Old Testament figure who most readily leaps to mind when one thinks of leadership, was never thus described. One must distill the lesson from the absent word and see how it has influenced, perhaps subconsciously, the effectiveness of Jewish leaders throughout history. In Hebrew, the word for mother, aim, is followed alphabetically by the word for child, ben. This Hebrew peculiarity would be duplicated in English, where the word child to be spelled not child, but NPN, following alphabetically, as it were, the word mom. This is, of course, not the case in English, but it is so in Hebrew. The A of am is followed by B of ben, and likewise, the M of am is followed alphabetically by the N of ben. This oddity, part of a Kabbalistic tradition, leads to the conclusion that no deep analysis is required to find out what a mother is. If a woman is followed by a child, that is to say, she gives birth to or adopts a child, then she is a mother by definition. There is no way to become a mother other than by having a child. Similarly, there is no need to analyze what a leader is. A leader is someone who has followers. There is no way to be a leader other than having followers. Becoming a leader. How do you become a leader? The answer is acquire followers. How do you acquire followers? First, acquire certain character traits, and then be willing to assume the responsibility of leadership by stepping into the role when circumstances bring the opportunity into your orbit of activities. Moses acquired the traits of leadership while living in the palace of Pharaoh. Later, God called him to leadership at the burning bush. At first, he demurred, explaining to the Lord why he was not the right choice. Discovering that you don't say no to God, he went on to lead the ancient Israelites out of Egypt. He came with the character traits, he came with an attractive vision for the future, and he acquired followers. There are no guarantees. Many people will acquire or have already acquired these character traits without ever becoming leaders. Others are thrust into leadership or appointed to leadership without ever having acquired these traits, and they fail abysmally. They fail dismally. What are these character traits? Learn to follow if you want to learn to lead. Maintain a clear vision of your goal. Confrontation is often necessary, and leadership requires mastery of both faith and facts. Learn to follow if you want to learn to lead. Learning to follow is, of course, counterintuitive. I would have thought of that. To become an effective leader, I needed to appear powerful and invincible. That surely means conveying to my subordinates the impression that nobody tells their leader what to do. Oddly enough, precisely the reverse is what works. You stand more chance of making it into leadership if you never miss an opportunity to point out to those around you that your actions are not simply spur of the moment impulses, but the consequences of accountability to some external entity. Before people will follow a specific leader, they must first become viscerally persuaded on a subconscious level of a system of hierarchy. The leader depends on his or her followers accepting a sense of hierarchy in order to validate his or her leadership. Without some feeling that hierarchy is such is legitimate, the leader's entire leadership is in jeopardy. What This was part of Adolf Hitler's downfall. The Nazis inculcated the Führer principle throughout the Third Reich. Führer means leader, and the idea was that every loyal German was to have an immediate leader. To young teenagers, the Führer principles meant that they obeyed the orders of the leader of their local Hitler Youth chapter. To the German air officer, it meant he followed the word of Hermann Göring, the chief air marshal of the Luftwaffe. It was easy to follow the chain of leadership upward until one reached the ultimate leader, Hitler himself. The failure of the Führer principle was that the ultimate leader, Adolf Hitler, was not seen to have any leader himself. During the early stages of his leadership, he ruled by virtue of having pulled off breathtaking military successes. Later, as the tide turned against Germany, Hitler's leadership faltered because his decisions seemed to be capricious rather than in response to the orders of his ultimate authority. In contrast, Moses was one of the great leaders of ancient Israel, and in general, he was accepted as a leader regardless of whether things were going well or not. This principle of a leader needing also to be a follower is even more important than technical leadership skills. For instance, everyone recognizes that a leader needs to be able to delegate. Yet Moses was evidently a rather inadequate delegator. The Bible records how shocked his father-in-law Jethro was by the sight of Moses doing all the judging on his own. Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing that you do is not good. You will surely become worn out, for this work is too hard for you. You will not be able to do it alone." Moses took Jethro's advice and set up a management system of judges reporting to him. Although Moses obviously was not knowledgeable in this area of leadership, delegation, he nonetheless succeeded because he did possess the far more important quality of appearing to be a good follower. There were occasional minor rebellions against his leadership, but whenever God stepped in to help quell the uprisings, Moses' authority was even more firmly entrenched. Part of the reason that he was accepted as leader by millions of Jewish slaves was that he was seen to be a follower just as much as a leader. He constantly made clear to his people that he was carrying out the words of God. The people themselves saw Moses punished whenever he deviated from such higher orders. The U.S. institution that has perhaps the finest system of leadership training is the military. Again, the leaders must be followers too. Principle is at work. Even the most lowly ranked soldier knows that his commanding officer has his own commanding officer, and so on, all the way up to the President of the United States, who, in turn, owes allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. One secret behind each sergeant's leadership is that he is not merely an independent tyrant embittering the lives of the soldiers beneath him, but he is a representative of a higher authority and answerable to that authority. A well known directive found in the first chapter of Sayings of the Fathers, a well loved volume of the Oral Torah, reminded Jews of the necessity of being a good follower. This section of the Mishnah, which is still often read in synagogues on Sabbath afternoon, reads: Yeshua ben Percha said, "Identify a rabbi as your rabbinic authority." This rule helped establish the idea that no Jew is an independent authority, but is instead bound to the traditions and rules of the past, and only through following them acquires the power to rule others. To this day, it is not uncommon to find conspicuously successful Jewish business leaders who defer many decisions to an aged parent who was the original founder of the business. How to apply this leaders must be followers to principle in your own career can best be seen from the Torah model of how Jews believe the Jewish family was designed to operate. One way in which the traditional Jewish family benefits from this principle is the greater tendency of children in these more traditional families to obey parents and to observe their parents' values. They tend to accept their parents' authority because they are made very aware of the many areas in which their own parents follow authority also. Obeying parents only makes sense if the fundamental principle of obeying anyone else at all in the first place is supported. If the family vehicle sported a bumper sticker such as those that were in vogue during the 1970s, question authority, it would be difficult for parents to demand obedience from their children without becoming figures of derision. By contrast, children raised in traditional Jewish homes have ample opportunity to observe their parents upholding the principle of authority as they obey a wide swath of laws. The children are allowed to see how rules regulate how their mothers and fathers dress, eat, and even relate intimately. This evidence that parents follow a higher authority helps to validate the parents' authority with respect to their children. Parents are advised by Jewish tradition never to respond to the question, "Why are you doing that?" with the merely, "Because I want to," or "Because that's how it is." Instead, they commonly tell even their youngest children, "Because that is what God said I must do." In so doing, they are not weakening their parental authority, they are enhancing it. In your career, you can easily make use of this principle. You might not be in a situation in which you can claim to be obeying the authority of a board of directors, but you might be an employee of a firm without a board of directors, or you might be the owner of a small private company. In either case, can you easily demonstrate that you are a follower because, to all appearances, as owner, you do whatever you wish. Fortunately, this principle works just as well when you declare yourself to be a follower of a set of principles, and this is something that anyone can do. Some organizations try to achieve this end with an honor code or mission statement. It is important that these not be trite or even sound trite. Remember, you're trying to make it easier for people to follow your lead by showing that you subscribe to the leadership principle. You must find ways to demonstrate that you do not operate capriciously on the basis of whatever you happen to feel like doing. Therefore, you should seek opportunities in the presence of those you would lead to say things like, I would if I could, but my commitment or the company's commitment to this or that prevents me. In other words, do everything possible to avoid sounding like a big shot. For example, ambassadors drive considerable prestige and power by subordinating themselves to their governments. The ambassador's favorite phrase is, I will have to check with my government. On the surface, this would seem to diminish the diplomat. After all, where is his or her independent authority? Strangely, it does precisely the reverse. It endows the ambassador with additional authority. So, whatever you credibly claim to be under the authority of another person or group of persons, like a boss or a board, or whether you claim to be under the authority of a set of principles or rules that you regard as rigid, your leadership capacity benefits either way. Maintain a clear vision of your goal. During the early 1990s, the wounded giant IBM nearly collapsed. From having nearly 500,000 employees and a market capitalization larger than the gross domestic product of half of the countries on the United Nations roster, IBM appeared ready for demise. Then, in early 1993, IBM's board appointed Lou Gerstner as CEO. His first public utterance as IBM chief was, the last thing IBM needs right now is a vision. Since then, IBM chief, IBM went up fivefold, while the Dow during the same period nearly tripled. Gerstner has done well by his shareholders, but according to Richard Karlgaard, Forbes magazine's publisher, Gerstner lied. IBM did have a vision from 93 to 2002. It was to become a master of new technology. IBM led the nation's companies in recording patents. It developed blue laser technology, speech recognition technology, optical microscopes, copper wired microprocessors, and many other breakthroughs. People, people sometimes mock the vision thing, but everyone needs a vision. Someone intending to lead when the opportunity presents itself needs one even more urgently. You must have a vision of your goal. More important, you have to know when to focus your goal and when to focus on the intermediate steps. Suppose your project is to build a house. Should you focus on the overall design and how it will integrate with surrounding scenery? Or should you focus on finding a supplier for the bricks? In other words, vision or details. What would someone who aspires to leadership do? Every Friday night, Jews sing the song Welcoming the Sabbath by depicting the day as an approaching bride. One stanza concludes with these words about the creation of the Sabbath day. Last indeed, first in thought. The idea is that although God only created the Sabbath after he had already concluded his work during the first 6 days of creation, the Sabbath had been in his mind from the outset. This is why Hebrew affixes no names to the days of the week, preferring instead to refer to them as day 1, day 2, and so on. The idea is that if named, each day could be said to have its own existence as a disconnected and independent entity. However, by being numbered, each day exists only as a link to the sequence of numbers that concludes with the number 7, the Sabbath. In other words, the purpose of Sunday, Monday, and so on is primarily to lead to Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath. In this way, God is not seen as having run out of steam on the sixth day, having nothing else left to create, deciding to declare the next day a Sabbath. Instead, the Sabbath is seen as an intrinsic part of the entire creation plan, although it was the last project in the creation. This tradition is kept alive by those words in the Sabbath welcome song, last indeed, first in thought. More important, those words are also a guide as to the proper time for ultimate vision, goal oriented thinking. It should be last when you are engaged in deed, but first when you are engaged in thought. Do you remember that house? While designing it, think of its ultimate usage. Consider what it will look like up there on the hill. Should you include the existing trees in the final landscape? Now it is the time to think about it. But soon the design phase will be complete and the blueprints drawn. Now it is the time to begin grading the lot and digging foundations. At this deed phase of the project, contemplation of the final picture is merely daydreaming. Now there is work to be done, and that comes most easily when you focus on each step that lies ahead. Thus, the answer to the original question is that you should be able to focus on both the goal and on the intermediate steps. To begin a software design project or a business plan, you must focus on your ultimate goal. You must then break down that goal into intermediate phases, ensuring that each phase links seamlessly with those around it. Then, you need to break down each phase into specific tasks, each of which can be tackled without any direction from the bigger picture. At regular intervals, you should glance up at the bigger picture to make certain that you are still on course. People are more liable to follow people who demonstrate that they know where they are headed, as well as knowing how to skirt or overcome the obstacles on the way. I cannot tell you exactly how to apply this principle in your life and in your career, but I can assure you that no matter what your occupation may be, there are opportunities to do so. Confrontation is often necessary. If you aspire to leadership, you must have the courage to persuasively present your vision. Even if you fail to carry the day, you are still ahead in leadership terms. Your vision may be a new marketing campaign, or it may be a vision of fairness and integrity. Naturally, you know how to confront productively, but no leader fears confrontation. I suspect that this important lesson crept into Jewish business culture from a famous biblical account of an incident in the life of Judah. Out of all 12 of Jacob's sons, Judah was the one who passed royal leadership down to his descendants. He was also the son whose name became the national identity of the Jews. This is more easily seen in the German word for a Jew, Jude, which was eventually contracted to Jew in English. 10 of Judah's brothers plotted to kill Joseph, the dreamer. The eldest son, Reuben, suggested that instead of actually shedding blood themselves, they would do better to cast him into a pit where he would eventually die. Later, after they had done so, Judah approached his brothers with a plan to haul Joseph out the pit and sell him to a passing band of merchants. It is believed that this was Judah's attempt to save his younger brother's life. A few verses later can be found the words, "And it was at that time that Judah descended from his brothers." Where did he descend to? And why use the word descend? Ancient Jewish wisdom records the answer. Judah descended from his traditional position of leader. Deep inside their hearts, his brothers viewed him as having failed in leadership. Regretting the irreversible sale of Joseph, the brothers confronted Judah and blamed him for a failure in leadership. "Had you told us to return Joseph to his father rather than kill him or sell him, we would have listened to you." Judah felt himself diminished by their valid indictment, and the word descended accurately describes what happened to him. Apparently, Judah lacked the courage to confront his brothers with what he really wanted to say. "Look here, there is no way we can kill our brother, no matter how much we dislike him. We cannot hurt our father in this heartless fashion. I am not going along with this, and neither are you. Now, haul him out of the pit and send him home." Instead, he aimed for a halfway measure and lost the respect of his brothers. He literally descended from them. Later, Judah recovers his leadership when Joseph, a viceroy of Egypt, threatens to keep Benjamin incarcerated. At that point in the narrative, it was Judah who stepped forward and explained to the feared Egyptian ruler that they simply could not go home without Benjamin. It was this display of courage, of fearless leadership, that moved Joseph deeply enough to reveal himself to his long lost brothers. By facing confrontation, Judah recovered his leadership. The Enron debacle of fall 2001 revealed several instances of willingness to confront. One person who displayed little fear of confrontation was Sharon Watkins, a senior employee at Enron, who during summer 2001 told Enron chairman and CEO Kenneth Lay that accounting irregularities would bring the company down. In what appears to have been a high-flying, risk-taking atmosphere, her lonely cautionary voice would certainly not have been welcome. Nonetheless, she held her own and entered the pages of U.S. corporate history. It is notable that in the subprime mortgage collapse of 2008 and in the ensuing financial crisis it spawned, no great voices of leadership emerged in either business or government. When Lehman Brothers filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in September 2008, it could not have been a total surprise within the company. After all, It was more than a year earlier that Lehman had shut down its subprime lending subsidiary, BNC Mortgage, yet we heard of no courageous voices warning of the upcoming crisis. During 2008, when Fannie Mae's role in the collapse became clear, we discovered that for over 10 years, government had been pressuring the agency to encourage homeowner loans made on political rather than financial criteria. Yet, how many politicians stepped forward to warn the country that was being perpetrated? Leadership is rare, and it requires more than courage alone. Leadership requires mastery of both faith and facts. Some people master facts. If the facts they master pertain to the elasticity of polymers or the electrical resistance characteristics of semiconductors, those people tend to do well working as engineers. If the facts that they master are legal precedents, they tend to succeed working for law firm or law school. Other people who master the idea of faith might find their niche as theologians. Those destined to succeed in leadership when the circumstance presents itself are those who have mastered both faith and fact. The latter is the easier to dispense with. Clearly, my confidence in my leader will be badly shaken if I find out that he or she is unaware of important and germane facts. This does not mean that my sergeant or my president must necessarily be an encyclopedia of facts. It does mean that the leader should be drawing on those who are in possession of the needed facts. He or she cannot risk appearing indifferent to facts relevant to the operation. For example, if an invasion is planned, I expect to be reassured by the leader's focus on intelligence. I want to see the leader assigning someone the job of finding out exactly what defensive capacity will be confronted. Israel's Prime Minister Olamert never recovered from his failed 2006 invasion of Lebanon. He was widely perceived to have ignored intelligence and was suspected to have launched the offensive for personal political ends rather than in the national interest. Similarly, if a new marketing campaign is being launched, I will more eagerly throw my efforts into the task if I know that the leader is aware of the competition. It is clear that your efforts to become a leader will be thwarted if you cannot master the relevant facts. Mastery of facts is an indispensable accompaniment to leadership, but it is only half the story. If facts are all you master, then you will always be valuable to leaders, but you are not destined to become a leader yourself. The other necessary element is that of faith. Does that mean only religious people can become leaders? No, of course not. When I use the word faith, I mean ability to work as comfortably with something yet invisible as if it were already present reality. Whether you are leading yourself or already leading others, you are distinguished by something very important. You alone see the desired outcome in front of your very eyes, as plainly as if it were already a reality. Ancient Jewish wisdom requires a father to do 5 things for his children. He must first induct them into their social religious group so that they will never feel culturally disconnected. He must then instruct them in what he expects from them. He must also assist them to marry. He must teach them an occupation by means of which they can become useful to humanity and thereby earn their living. And finally, he must teach them to swim. These 5 obligations rest on business leaders too. As a leader, you must induct your employees into the culture of your organization. Without undergoing that acculturating experience, employees will never participate fully as members of a team. Without it, they will also fail to develop internal guidelines that will allow them to use their initiative in the absence of specific direction. You must also be crystal clear on exactly what you expect from those who look to you for leadership. You must also regard it as part of your mandate to ensure that no employee languishes in loneliness. You must provide skill training that will allow each employee to contribute to the bottom line. And finally, you must equip all your employees with the ability to remain afloat in turbulent waters. When Abraham felt obliged to find his son Isaac a wife, he dispatched his trusted servant Eliezer with these words: "Swear to me that you will never select a wife for my son from the Canaanites among whom I live." When Eliezer traveled back to Abraham's hometown of Nahor and finally picked Rebekah, he recounted the incident to Rebekah's family in these slightly modified words. And my master made me swear to him that I would not select a wife for his son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I live. Tradition records that Ebenezer subconsciously switched the words from among whom I dwell to in whose land I live. That is the main difference between a leader and a follower. Abraham had been promised by God that the land was given to him. It was completely irrelevant that he was an isolated individual living among hordes of hostile Canaanites. To Abraham, they were now interlopers in his land. That was why he said the Canaanites may be the people among whom he was living, but he was living among them in his own land. To Ebenezer, the faithful follower, it was inconceivable that this was already Abraham's land. He lacked the faith to regard the invisible as an already existing reality. Ebenezer felt that although God has promised the land to his master, it would become a reality when the transfer actually took place. To Abraham, the fact that God had promised him the land made it the present reality. He may be living among Canaanites, but he was doing so in his own land. But in recounting the story to Rebekah's family, Ebenezer could not bring himself to utter the ridiculous words which he had heard Abraham say, among whom I live, thus implying these strangers that he already regarded as the land as belonging to his master. Thus, from the very start, Jews absorbed into their very beings the idea that you must act as if the desired outcome was already the reality. Before every single sales call, clearly see in your mind's eye the customer signing on the dotted line. In that way, you are magically transformed from a hopeful but apprehensive supplicant into someone merely formalizing something that is already a reality. That is what I mean by saying that faith is more important than facts. Obviously, you must know everything there is to know about your product and about how it will fill your customers' needs. That is necessary, but hardly sufficient. You also have to see the not yet completed transaction as if it were an already done deal. Most of the really important adventures on which you embark depend on belief and faith. For instance, when you marry, you seldom do so on the basis of incontrovertible facts. You don't walk down the aisle knowing for certain that you are going to live happily ever after in the state of permanently wedded bliss, and you don't enter the state of matrimony knowing everything there is to know about your spouse. You marry on the basis of belief and faith. Paradoxically, the more certainty you attempt to inject into the situation, the less successful is the outcome. For instance, living together on a trial basis prior to making the marriage commitment ought to confer advantage, but it appears not so. After all, who would purchase a car without trying it out first, goes the old adage. Wrong. Buying a car is an action that can and should be based on total mastery of facts. You would be foolish to make a car buying decision on the basis of falling in love with a particular brand's effective advertising and its seductive brochure. Before driving that shiny new vehicle out of the showroom, you should know everything there is to know about the car and the deal. But marriage is different. Statistics concerning the durability of marriages show that couples who live together before marriage suffer a far higher divorce rate than those who did not. This is not really counterintuitive once realizes that marriage is a faith-based activity. For an entrepreneur, starting a business is far more closely resembles marriage than it does buying a car. Faith is key. Using the power of prayer to enhance your faith and to improve your business success. How do people most effectively develop their faith muscle, as it were? Obviously, some are far better at this than others. However, there's no reason to leave it behind. Human beings can improve their ability to memorize poetry, to hold their breath underwater, and to run 5 miles. They can also increase their abilities in the faith arena. Your effectiveness as a leader will have much to do with how much faith you exude about desired outcomes, and you can increase your ability to both feel and exude faith. An insight into how to increase your strength of faith can be gleaned from both religion and medicine. At Harvard Medical School, Dr. Herbert Benson, author of The Relaxation Response, found that psychological stress that impeded healing and that lowered immunity could be diminished by a simple prescription. Patients participating in the test were asked to utter a prayer, phrases, or other positive sounds repeatedly while simultaneously shutting out their thoughts. Isn't that a perfect description of prayer? When people pray, they repeatedly utter words and phrases that relate to a positive outlook about the future while they shout out opposing thoughts. It is not surprising that many investigations, such as the Dartmouth Medical School study of 1995, have linked recovery to prayer. If you regularly participate in prayer, then you are already practiced in the technique. If not, then it will take just a little longer to overcome the self consciousness that will tend to inhibit you. Dr. Benson at Harvard Medical School provided the clue. It simply is not adequate to merely think positive thoughts. Instead, you must actually utter them. I recognize that it isn't easy to speak out loud when nobody else is present. Initially, doing so will cause you to nervously glance at the door, perhaps expecting white coated attendants to barge in at any moment to take you to the nearest mental hospital. After all, people tend to distrust those who wander city streets talking to themselves. That is why I would recommend that you practice this technique when alone. You will not necessarily find it easy. I don't think that most people are comfortable following the talk it out loud advice I'm about to dispense. This is perhaps why prayer is most easily achieved in a congregation of many others doing exactly the same thing. You might feel a little less self conscious praying in company. Through prayer, you have the capacity to bring about powerful consequences, but only if you actually utter the words loudly enough for your own ears to hear. Here's another idea of how to expand the lessons of verbal prayer to the rest of your life. You might respond to this suggestion with incredulity, but I recommend that you try it for a few weeks, rather than allowing your skepticism to prevent you from undergoing a possibly exciting and profitable experience. I recommend that you try it for a few weeks, rather than allowing your skepticism to prevent you from undergoing a possibly exciting and profitable experience. My suggestion is quite simple. Early in each day, find a quiet opportunity to say out loud an affirmation of faith having to do with your business challenge. It need not be lengthy, but you should state it explicitly, and it should reflect your conviction in what you intend to achieve. For example, if your professional goal is to increase revenue during the coming month, do not merely say out loud to yourself, I know I can sign up more clients this month, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Instead, be more specific and think about what has hitherto obstructed your path to greater revenue. Have you failed to line up sufficient meetings with prospects? Have you met with prospects but failed to persuade a significant number to give your services a try? Identify as precisely as possible the exact areas in which you intend to improve. Make certain that you are not being handicapped by any lack of technical skill or inadequate knowledge. Remember, do not confuse resolutions, such as that you might have uttered last December, with goals. Resolutions seldom bring progress. Just think of how politicians use resolutions as a substitute for passing what might be an unpopular but necessary bill. Instead of passing, say, healthcare reform, they issue a resolution bemoaning the current condition of healthcare. No resolutions get you nowhere. Now, goals are quite different. Unlike resolutions, goals are specific and they have deadlines. This makes all the difference in firing up your soul to improve your life. Once you are certain that you are equipped for success and that you know where you intend to apply your energies, you are ready to commence your program. Dr. Benson might call it repeated uttering out loud phrases and sentences that describe you succeeding, while simultaneously shutting out any negative thoughts. Now, write down your specific goals. This is important. By writing them down, you will not be distracted by concerns over what to say next. Furthermore, you will benefit from using the same terminology repeatedly. This is why so much of prayer is formalized and standardized text. This process should take about 2 or 3 minutes a day. Don't rush it. Don't do it where you need not fear of being overheard by someone. Say your affirmation loudly enough for your own ears to hear, and do it regularly for a period of at least 2 weeks before you dismiss it as ineffective. If you follow these instructions diligently, you will be pleasantly surprised. Here's an analogy. Musical advertising jingles do not constitute great symphonic music, but they do add considerable value to radio and television advertising because the music makes the commercial more memorable and adds emotional wallop to the message. The simple tunes do not convey the lofty aspirations of the human soul that are found in a Beethoven symphony, but they effectively utilize some of the power of music. Only a cultural snob would frown on the commercial usage of music and its ability to penetrate the soul. Similarly, what I have just described to you borrows microscopic morsels from the infinite power of prayer and deploys those morsels to great effect. Obviously, this does not replicate prayer or even resemble it in any meaningful way, yet this process bears exactly the same relationship to prayer as advertising jingles do to Beethoven's symphony. Eroica. Remember, advertising jingles work, and so does this. Finally, consider this. What do you have to lose by trying? Skepticism is natural, and I would be surprised if you felt none. Everyone has been somewhat conditioned to think of humans as very little more than $6 worth of common chemicals. So, how can talking to yourself possibly do anything for you other than getting you committed to a not particularly choosy asylum for the disturbed? If you're absolutely sure that this is the sum total of a human, then there is little for me to say. But if you have come to suspect that humans are creatures whose domination of the world has more to do with their spiritual side than with the mass of their brains, then this idea should make some sense to you. Maintaining balance. One of the dilemmas of leading is finding the balance between two competing and often incompatible demands. Suppose a military leader has orders to take an objective regardless of casualties, and this military leader knows that part of what makes him a leader is his deep concern for each and every warrior under his command. For example, whenever he became aware of Allied losses during World War II, Winston Churchill was unable to conceal from those around him the grief that welled up inside him. When torturing bombed out homes in London during the Blitz, Churchill was met by brave homeowners standing astride the ruins of their former homes, and he wept openly. Similarly, any leader, whether military or corporate, needs to view those under her command simultaneously both pieces in the overall puzzle and unique as all important human beings. Jewish tradition is not baffled by an apparent indecisiveness that God has about Abraham's descendants. Sometimes he assures the patriarch that his children will be as many as the sand of the seashore, and at other times he predicts them to grow to be as many as the stars in the heavens. Why doesn't God stick with one metaphor? The traditional answer teaches a valuable business lesson in leadership. There is one key difference between grains of sand and stars. The former only has significance in concert with countless other similar grains of sand. Together they can form a dike and hold back the seas, but alone each grain gets swept away. A star, on the other hand, stands alone in its brilliance and significance. God wants Abraham to learn to view his people in these two conflicting ways at the same time. Are you expected to cope with two conflicting ideas simultaneously? Yes. If you want to lead, you must. This is where the Oral Torah teaches this lesson to Jews. A translation of the Bible's first chapter, Genesis, would quickly reveal that the first commodity created by God was light. The oral transmission asks the question, why should light have been first? Why not water or people or air? It was the oral transmission that explained the answer in terms that would much later become familiar to 20th century theoretical physics. The creation of the world was the original conversation of mind to matter. Things came into existence, apparently not only in workshop, but merely as a result of God thinking and speaking. No commodity more than light so obviously bridges that gap between ideas and reality. After all, light possesses an almost inexplicable duality. On the one hand, a light beam behaves with perfect predictability, as if it were a stream of tiny tennis balls called photons. The flashlight emitting the light beam even gives an immeasurably small recoil when one turns it on, just as would a tennis training machine as it commences firing its tennis balls at a waiting player on the tennis court. On the other hand, light is nothing more than advancing wavefronts of intangible information with the capacity to interfere with one another. Well, which is it? Is light a stream of tiny particles with mass and presence, no matter how small, or is light intangible information and data? It cannot be both, yet it is both. Light is the inference of data and matter. It is one thing that God would have had to start with if his mind was to bring matter into being from nothingness. Light is the original bridge from mere thought into real matter, and nothing else could serve this role any better. As challenging as it may be, light serves as a reminder that for a leader to change a reality, he or she must nearly always cope with the conflicting ideas and even conflicting demands. Not everyone can do it. Not everyone wants to make the effort to learn how. Leaders do. Maintain employee individuality. Nowhere is the challenge of incompatible demands more difficult than in human relationships. Whether in dealing with employees, shareholders, family members, or even yourself, you frequently have to walk the line between two incompatible desires. Sometimes you have to choose one or the other alternative. At other times, you can express your ambivalence in word and thought, and even though in action only one course can be tolerated. You need to recognize that on an exquisitely spiritual plane, two apparently incompatible entities can usually be wielded into one luminescent harmony. Just as particles and waves constitute light even though they should not be able to do so, viewing a person simultaneously as part of a larger mission and as an indispensable human like no other can constitute the highest form of leadership. In ancient Israel, Jewish kings were prohibited from counting the people of Israel. Whenever a census was necessary, stratagems were contrived to avoid actual counting of the population. Will lay behind this prejudice against counting. The whole point of counting a lot of objects is that in so doing, you are implying that they are all identical. You wouldn't count dollars, pesos, liras, and pounds and end up with one total currency figure. Were a king to count his people by conventional census, he would be accustoming himself to view them as a faceless crowd of anonymous and identical beings whose purpose is merely to serve him. No leader who becomes known for viewing his or her subjects or subordinates that way will survive for long. It is true that on one level, the employees of an organization are there to fulfill the purpose of the organization. It is also true that cross training is recommended and manuals are created in order to make the position indispensable, rather than making any one occupant of the position indispensable. Ideally, it would be wonderful to have an organization structured not to miss a beat if any one or even all of the employees walked out the door and were replaced the next day by a new people. In reality, of course, that could never work. Even with the best operating manuals, organization charts, and management structure, any organization still depends on the subtle human network of accumulated knowledge, culture, and skills within all its people, which makes it behave more like a single interconnected organism than like a hotel filled with disconnected guests staying the night. This is obviously true for a software development company, in which virtually all its assets, namely its people, leave every evening to go home. Were an entirely different set of people to show up the next morning, the company would clearly be in turmoil. Any observer lacking the understanding that the commercial enterprise is at its heart a spiritual one would argue, wait a moment, these people look just like those who left last night. There is the same number of men and women, blacks and whites, and they all have the same backgrounds and training as your former employees. What do you mean the company can't operate? It is also true for a manufacturing enterprise in which most of the company's assets are its machinery and factory infrastructure. Still, the company depends on the relationships that its employees have built up between one another and on the trust between them. Replacing them all overnight would be a very perilous undertaking. The wise leader recognizes this dichotomy between nobody is indispensable and everybody is indispensable. Of course, businesses try to organize their enterprises around functions rather than personalities. Whether you're setting up a workstation along a computer assembly line or a customer service phone desk, you know exactly what function needs to be performed at that point. You then ask the personality to adjust himself or herself to the needed function. However, you never lose sight of the personality. Wise leaders do their best to not only get to know the personality, but also to make certain that the personality realizes that to the leader, he or she is more than merely a function. When Hitler assumed personal command of the German army on December 22, 1941, his words were selected to demonstrate how he too identified with the ordinary soldier. Thus, nothing that torments you weighs upon you and oppresses you is unknown to me. My soldiers, you will therefore believe that my heart belongs solely to you. What I can do for you, my soldiers, by way of care and leadership, will be done. His actions did not match his words. Less than a year later, Albert Speer recalled an evening when he sat with Hitler in the dining car of his personal railway stopped at a siding. The table was elegantly set with silver, glass, china, and flowers, and we began our meal. None of us at first saw the freight train that had stopped on the adjacent track. From the cattle car, bedraggled, starved, and in some cases wounded German soldiers just returned from the east stared at the two diners. With a start, Hitler noticed the somber scene just 2 yards from his window. Without as much as a gesture of greeting in their direction, he pre peremptorily ordered the servant to draw the shades. It is not surpassing that while German people were still unfatigued with the Führer, the German military machine was already becoming disenchanted. High election Wehrmacht officers formed more than one conspiracy to assassinate Hitler. You must seek out opportunities to demonstrate your awareness of the person as an indispensable part of your commercial organism. Great loyalty is acquired by leaders who express concern about an ill spouse. Do you know anything about the children of your employees? Find out what hobbies and sports your employees pursue. These seem obvious features, but in my experience, many people fail at leadership because they fail to convince that they care. It is very difficult to find the balance between caring and effectiveness, but that is the challenge. Maintain balance between short and long term goals. Another area in which anyone wanting to lead must find balance is short term versus long term thinking. Every CEO of a public company knows the struggle between spending the morning trying to develop a strategy for the next 3 years and then spending the afternoon with the security analysis who only care about the next quarter's results. It is tough, which is why leading isn't for everyone. Parents have to do it constantly. They worry about their children doing their homework, but they're also concerned about the long term career choices. They worry about their children getting home on time from a date, but they also fret about their offspring's capacity to form long term marital unions much later. Similarly, in your own money making areas, you have short term issues and you have long term planning. Generally, you attend to the short term financial urgencies while sometimes neglecting the longer term planning. Whether as an executive, a parent, or a reader of this book trying to enhance your revenue producing capacity, everyone needs to set aside scheduled time on a regular basis for longer term planning. This is a function of smart time management, and it must be done. Maintain balance between increasing your income and cutting your costs. A final area in which balance must be maintained is the tension between increasing your revenue and containing your expenses. There's obviously a point of diminishing returns if you are spending too much of your awake time and much of your energy on cost containment. It clearly needs to be done, but you must also remember it carries a cost of its own. You need to make regular decisions concerning controlling expenses, but having done so, you must separate yourself from those anxieties in order to be able to focus on revenue growth. As a leader, you must not only maintain this balance, but show those who look to you for leadership that you are aware of both areas, aware of the tension between them, and are maintaining an effective balance. Use body language to look like a leader. I'm about to explain something that fits into category popularly known as body language. This is an almost imperceptible quality, but an important one. Others use it to determine leadership potential, but are often unable to put into words what it is. Often people feel like they are in the presence of a leader. Yet, when asked exactly what it was that impressed them, most would shrug their shoulders and find it difficult to answer. What I am about to describe to you should be applied to how you sit at meetings and how you deliver presentations in public. From the outside, it will make you look far more leader like and more important. From the inside, it will make you feel far more leader like. It is a behavior that will take you some weeks to learn, but during that time, you will need to subject yourself to rigorous discipline. If you do, in due course, this valuable behavior will become second nature. I guarantee that it will play a role in changing your life for the better. Let me first give you some background regarding why appearance is so important to great leadership. Have you ever wondered why popular Western culture depicts the Lion King as king of animals? The lion is neither the strongest nor the largest animal. Among animals, he neither lives the longest nor possesses the largest brain. As a rabbi, I turn to traditional Jewish sources for the answer. More than 2,000 years ago, the Talmud stated that the lion is the king of the beasts. Though his fables taken from the Talmud, Aesop, who had been a Jewish slave by the name of Joseph, for which Aesop is merely the Greek equivalent, had probably carried a royal notion of the lion into Greek culture. In the context of the Talmudic discussion, it becomes clear why Jewish tradition crowned the lion as king. Lions are more economical in movement than any other large animal. I had several opportunities to verify this Talmudic observation because when I was in my early 20s, I rode a motorcycle and camped my way across most of Africa, which afforded me the opportunity of seeing many wonderful animals close up. Even when exploding into action to pursue and kill its quarry, the lion's body seems to flow smoothly with no unnecessary movement. You would have to be fortunate even to see a lion in motion. Most of the time, he will lie alert, but almost motionless. Only his open eyes and head, occasionally moving slowly from side to side, betray his wakeful state. In contrast, the elephant seems always to be eating, and he constantly flaps his ears or waves his trunk. So do most other animals. The lion's demeanor is regal because of his appearing to have total control over his body. That is impressive. Similarly, as a 10-year-old boy in London, I saw the Queen's Guards outside of Buckingham Palace for the first time. I can still recall my father drawing my attention to their ability to stand absolutely still, and I still recall my amazement as I stood and watched them for perhaps 15 minutes. During that August afternoon, I saw a fly crawl across one guard's forehead, and he never budged. I saw sweat rolling down from beneath that large bearskin hat, and the guard never budged. I saw Taurus badgering him, and still the guard did not move an eyelash. It was a lesson in power that I have not forgotten. Shakespeare put these words into Hamlet's mouth. Rightly to be great, it is not to stir without great argument, but greatly to find quarrel in a straw when honor's at stake. This is exactly the same principle as demonstrated to me by the lion and the Queen's Guard. Greatness in others is shown in part by their careful, deliberate movements that reveal an underlying control of themselves. Consider the opposite. For example, I have always been impressed by Alfred Hitchcock's classic thriller The Birds, based on Daphne du Maurier's novel of the same name. If a studio had asked me to develop an unexpectedly terrifying scenario, I am certain that the brilliant idea would never have occurred to me of turning one of nature's most powerless creatures into the source of terror. What is it about birds that conveys their powerlessness? Is it not only their relatively small size, but also the jerkiness of their land based movements? Naturally, they are far more graceful in flight, but as they walk, their heads dart here and there, and they progress by what seems to be a random progression of jumps and runs, a little sidestep here and a backstep there. Control your physical movements to show self assurance. You see where this is going, don't you? Stop fidgeting. Are you in a meeting? Stop playing with the pencil. Don't cross and then uncross your legs every 5 minutes. Place your feet on the floor. Find a comfortable place for your hands and keep them there. Talk when you must. Sit as stationary as possible and listen. Be lion like. Don't allow your eyes to constantly wander around the room. Face whoever is speaking by turning as much of you as possible in the new direction. Instead of allowing your eyes to follow the speaker, rather turn your entire upper body to do so. Looking at someone out of the corner of your eye looks shifty. If you are sitting on a swivel chair, it would be better to swivel your chair smoothly until you are facing the speaker. Above all, above all, avoid constant movement. And when you do move, make it for a good reason. As Shakespeare said, when you must move, make it a smooth, economical movement, moving just as much as necessary and not a millimeter more. Are you giving a speech? Use your hands and arms to dramatize your points. However, be sure to keep your elbows tucked into your sides while making fluttering gestures with your forearms. Gesture grandly with your entire arm. Move your arms from the shoulders and never from the elbows. While speaking to a group, do not fix your body in a rigid forward-facing posture. Instead, allow your upper body to swivel smoothly from the waist. Watch the inexperienced speaker's body remain locked into position while his or her eyes dart nervously around the room. This speaker looks nervous, weak, and shifty. You should keep your eyes in place. Sweep your gaze around the room by moving your entire upper body. And one more thing. Do not grasp the podium. It will stand without your assistance. Gripping it will only convey the impression that it is you who are in danger of toppling without the podium's reassuring presence. All of this is intended to make you look and ultimately feel regal. But of course, looking and feeling regal are only part of the technique. One must also act regally if one aspires to leadership. Again, the metaphor of the lion is appropriate. Lions never appear to be petty, and neither should you. Nothing undermines your leadership more fatally than the appearance of pettiness. The Talmud advises you to become the tail of the lion rather than the head of the fox. One reason is that lions can often be observed walking with their tails erect, pointing straight up into the air, whereas foxes usually scurry around with their snouts almost on the ground as they follow a scent. The message is, don't associate with cunning and petty little people. Even though they may shake your even though they may make you their head, In little time, they will succeed in bringing you low. If, however, you succeed in associating yourself with people of stature and true greatness, even if you start off as their tail, they will encourage you, elevate you, and give you every opportunity for growth. The practical lesson here is obvious. When faced with two alternative opportunities that involve different types of people, distinguished chiefly by the lion like characteristics of one and the fox like characteristics of the other, choose the lions. Being a lion means doing everything possible to elevate others. Once again, it is a paradox, but this makes you bigger, not smaller. Learn to give presentations without notes. I was 14 years old when I received my first speaking engagement. A visiting group of minor dignitaries was attending a banquet at the synagogue my father served as a rabbi. The powers that be had decided that there would be a 7-minute presentation by a representative of the synagogue youth, and because nobody else wanted to do it, the task fell to me. Make no mistake, I didn't want to do it. But Dad, who was a master orator, was impatient to launch my public speaking career and insisted that I prepare a speech. On the way to the event several days later, he asked me if I had carefully prepared my remarks. Because I had watched him prepare hundreds of speeches over the years, I assured him that I had done so. He then asked me if I had written out the speech word for word. Again, I assured him that I had done so. He asked me if I had brought along my notes along with me. Assuming he wanted reassurance that I was not going to embarrass him, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a sheaf of papers on which I had carefully constructed my speech. He reached over and took my papers from me. Then, with the sense of horror that I can recall today with all the emotional intensity of the moment, I watched him rip up my notes into shreds and toss them out of the car window. I will confess that protesting his littering was the furthest thing from my numbed mind reeling in anticipation of my impending mortification. He slowly began talking to me. What he said was that I wouldn't understand this action for many years, and that in the meantime, he wanted me to believe that he acted in my best interests until the day it would finally become clear to me. And then he pulled over the car and asked me to say my speech to him. At first, I petulantly refused, saying there was no point because I had no intention of giving the speech anyway. But finally, I relented and tried to recall my speech word for word. It was horrendous. Dad then laboriously began helping me to reformulate my speech in terms of its three classical components: the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. He divided each component into three subsections and then helped me decide on one key word by which I could remember the contents of each of my 9 subsections. Finally, he helped me recall and memorize 3 key phrases until they could roll off my tongue with fluency. It was then I noticed that while we were still in plenty of time for the banquet, I suspected that we had departed from home so early because Dad had foreseen the entire scenario that had just unfolded. He then told me I was going to speak to the synagogue group with no notes in my hand or on the podium, and that it was going to be far more successful speech than the one I had originally anticipated delivering, or, to be more honest, reading. Nobody needs to come to an event to hear the keynote speaker read his speech. Everyone subconsciously realizes that it would have been far more economical had the sponsoring organization merely replicated the written speech and distributed it to attendees by mail. No, no. When one listens to a well crafted and well delivered speech, no matter how short it may be, one comes away with the sense of having been granted a glimpse into the speaker's soul. Furthermore, the speech reaches more deeply and more directly into the listener's soul than had he or she merely read the speech in printed form. Abandoning my notes, knowing my subject matter, and being familiar with what I was going to describe next allowed me the luxury of eye contact with my audience. I could focus on gesture and modulation. Dad was right. My little maiden speech did not receive more enthusiastic acclaim than a 14-year-old incipient delinquent was entitled to, only because of Dad's intervention. It did receive more. On the drive home, I churlishly failed to thank him for tearing up my notes, but I have done so 1,000 times since, and I have almost never spoken from notes since that day. I tell you all that only to be able to tell you this. Believe me when I say that I know just how hard it is to hurl the crutches into the fireplace and deliver that speech with free hands. That is what notes are to a speech, merely crutches. You do not need them. What is more, once you have given your first speech entirely without notes before you, you will never go back to notes. You will enjoy the experience more than you ever did while speaking from written notes. You will be far more effective and your words will be more memorable. I will allow that if your work ever requires you to speak about many specific details and figures beyond your capacity to memorize reliably, use a teleprompter if available. This device is virtually invisible in a large hall and allows you to look up at the audience rather than crouching over your notes. Still, try to avoid depending on the teleprompter. I could hardly provide you with more powerful and useful advice than to encourage you to accustom yourself to public speaking sans notes. It really is easier than you suspect. However, you do need a ready vocabulary and an ease of public communication. It is hard to think of any effective leader, whether political, military, or business, who has not been an effective orator. My advice on how to increase your vocabulary and ease of public speaking is deceptively simple. It appears to be so simple that only some of those leaders who have paid me substantial fees for training them in the art of public speaking have actually followed through with the program. It seems too simple to be worth doing. I hope you don't make this mistake. Reading about it and thinking about it are not the same as doing it. You will astound yourself and everyone else if you follow this regimen for 6 to 8 weeks. Read aloud. Yes, that's right. All you need to do is read aloud. It is much easier to do this effectively with an audience. So if you have a friend, a spouse, or a child who will listen to you reading aloud, so much the better. Pick a good book. That is important. Pick a book written in a style that you would like to emulate. George Washington and Abraham Lincoln used the Bible. I myself used the words of Winston Churchill. Again, I must emphasize that it is your own ears that must hear your own mouth shaping itself around the words, so that you must read aloud with full intonation and expression. Do this for 20 to 30 minutes a day. I am recommending quite a tough discipline here. I know it. However, the results will themselves soon begin to urge you on. You won't believe the powerful effect this regimen will have on your ability to communicate with others. And without a strong ability to communicate, you can forget about leading anyone. Adopt a mask of command. Throughout this chapter, I have repeatedly emphasized that not only must you act in accordance with the principles of leadership, but you must always be sure to be seen doing so. It is often even more important to be seen that way than to actually feel that way. For instance, necessary qualities for leading are optimism and courage. It is far more important for, to say, a platoon leader to exhibit optimism and courage than it is for him to reflect how he honestly feels. His choices are either to radiate to his frightened and demoralized men an optimism of courage he doesn't feel, or to openly and candidly reveal his own uncertainties and fears. Should he select the latter course of action, he is no leader. Should he select the former, well, won't he feel like a fraud? Leading means not always revealing one's inner feelings of doubt. Greater store set by sincerity than it deserves. For instance, would you rather have your neighbor act generously and graciously towards you, although deep down in his heart he doesn't much care for you? Or would you rather him scratch your car and kick your cat as sincere expressions of his feelings? Of course, everyone would rather have associates and neighbors act in accordance with a common code of decency than in accordance with whatever their emotional condition of the moment dictated. Similarly, there are times in leading that it is simply inappropriate and counterproductive to reveal doubts, because doing so would undoubtedly cause ripples of morale sapping fear to spread throughout the organization. How does one develop the vital qualities of optimism and courage? The key principle employed here is one that lies within the heart of ancient Jewish wisdom. It concerns the relationship between how one feels and how one acts. You might mistakenly assume that you act in accordance with your feelings, but the ancient sages teach that in reality, you just as frequently come to feel in accordance with how you act. The principle is clear. If you don't like the way you feel about something or someone, start acting the way you would act if you already felt the way you wished you would feel, and you will soon come to feel that way. Did you get that? Just read it again. Here's an example. Suppose you had an argument with someone important in your life. You spent all day seething in anger at the unreasonable position taken by this person earlier that morning. When you meet the individual again, the argument probably picks up where it left off, or at best, a glacial iciness envelops the two of you. Here is a better way. If you really did feel wonderful about that person, wouldn't you show it? We'll do the same thing now. Bring a gift to the other person, who probably was at least as angry with you as you were with him or her. Is the gift going to make that person forget the argument and start loving or even liking you? Probably not, although it will probably mystify him or her. What it will do is far more important. Giving the gift will reduce your hostility and bring you to a different frame of mind. Your actions can change your feelings, That is not the same thing as saying your actions can change someone else's feelings. That is far less likely, although they certainly can do so. It is your feelings that your own actions can certainly change. In the same way, if you act the way you would act if you really were filled with optimism and courage, then pretty soon you will actually start feeling more courageous and optimistic. This may seem as if you are pulling on a mask to wear among the people with whom you work and live. Well, yes, that is true. And if you really want to become more effective, not only in the area of economic productivity, but in all of life, then you need to develop a comfort in yourself about leading and a comfort in others about being led by you. That sometimes does entail wearing a mask. I cannot say it better than the great military historian John Keegan. Heroic leadership, any leadership, is like priesthood, statesmanship, even genius, a matter of externals almost as much as of internalities. The exceptional are both shown to and hidden from the mass of humankind, revealed by an artifice, presented by theater. A theatrical impulse will be strong in the successful theater, politician, teacher, entrepreneur, athlete, or divine, and will be both expected and reinforced by the audiences to which they perform. One of the most exciting aspects of life and business is that no day is just like the day before. Constant change is both the stimulus and the challenge. Learning how to relate to change is an obvious characteristic possessed by successful leaders, and indeed by all successful business professionals. That is where I lead you next. Thou shalt prosper, the 10 Commandments for making money. The Fifth Commandment, lead consistently and constantly. This is the closing of the chapter, the summary. Learn to follow if you want to learn to lead. Leaders depend on their followers accepting a sense of hierarchy in order to validate their leadership. You stand more of a chance of making it to leadership if you never miss an opportunity to point out to those around you that your actions are not simply spur of the moment impulses, but are the consequences of accountability to some external entity. For example, it is not uncommon to find conspicuously successful Jewish business leaders who defer many or major decisions to an aged parent who was the original founder of the business. Have the courage to persuasively present your vision. Your vision might be a new marketing campaign, or it may be a vision of fairness and integrity. Naturally, you must know how to confront productivity, but no leader fears confrontation. Naturally, you must know how to confront productively, but no leader fears confrontation. Induct your employees into the culture of your organization. Without this, your employees will never participate fully as members of a team, and they will fail to develop internal guidelines that will allow them to use their initiative in the absence of specific direction. Be crystal clear on exactly what you expect from those who look to you for leadership. Ensure that no employee languishes in loneliness. Provide skill training that will allow each employee to contribute to the bottom line. Finally, make sure all your employees have the ability to remain afloat when things get turbulent. Adapt the power of prayer to your business goals. Early each day, find a quiet opportunity to say out loud an affirmation of faith having to do with some business challenge. It need not be lengthy, but it should be stated explicitly, and it should reflect your conviction in what you intend to achieve. Identify as precisely as possible the exact areas in which you intend improving. Then, write down your specific goals. Say your affirmation loudly enough for your own ears to hear, and do this regularly for a period of at least 2 weeks before you dismiss it as ineffective. If you follow these instructions diligently, you will be pleasantly surprised. Make sure you balance short and long-term business goals. In your own money making areas, you have short term issues and you have long term planning. Generally, people attend to the short term financial urgencies while sometimes neglecting the longer term planning. Whether as an executive, a parent, or a reader of this book trying to enhance your revenue producing capacity, everyone needs to set aside scheduled time on a regular basis for longer term planning. This is a function of smart time management and it must be done. Make sure not only that you have a long term plan, but also that those whom you lead are well aware of your long term views. When addressing immediate urgencies, find ways to express what needs to be done right now in terms of how it advances your entire organization along the track of its longer term plans. Carry yourself like a leader. Don't fidget during meetings, look people directly in the eye when speaking to them, speak authoritatively, and be able to give presentations without notes. Improve the quality of your speaking voice so that you sound like a leader. Don't let others know you have doubts. Instead, project confidence, optimism, and courage.